So thank you everyone for the patience, and thank you joining us tonight for the Houston Asian American Archive's first Artist Talk series. My name is Ann Shi. I'm the Associate Curator of the Archive and the Curator of the current exhibition Faces in the Pandemic at the Information Commons in the Fondren Library, Rice University. It'll be on view through to November 15th. And my assistant Ashley Zhang, who is a Rice senior, who has also exhibited her multimedia drawing titled "Caution." She'll be collecting questions from the audience and assisting during the talk tonight. Um, the Faces in the Pandemic Artist Talk series is programmed in juncture with the exhibition, which contextualizes our moment in history in 2020, which is a year highlighted by the public health crisis of COVID-19 pandemic, the social unrest, the humanitarian crisis of the murder of the George Floyd due to police brutality, and the upcoming election. The exhibition demonstrates the artist's response to these issues and their contribution towards the Houston contemporary art scene, the Texan art scene, and beyond. It marks the rising impacts of artists of Asian descent. And for most of these artists, America is the country where they call home. It is where they were born in and where they spent most of their lives in. The exhibition also emphasized the important roles the entire artist community play and serve in the pandemic, and the need for creativity, healing, and empowerment through the gathering, preservation, and propagation of voices. During this time of crisis, artists has been combating COVID-19 and confronting racism from past to present through their unique channels. The contribution from the 10 artists are tremendous. Despite isolation, financial hardship, and other mental and physical obstacles everyone else is facing, these artists went out of their ways to make this exhibition possible and coming out and together with such incredible works. So a big thank you for all the artists. The exhibition is also composed of a community project Faces the Pandemic, the namesake of the exhibition. So I also want to thank our 120 volunteers who are mostly Houston Asian American Archive interviewees from the past. They contributed their photos for the community mural project, which is installed in the first half of the Fondren Library hallway, and they're posting their direct and intense gazes, both with and without their faces covered by face masks. The Houston Asian American Archive was founded by Dr. Ann Chao, a Rice University faculty in the School of Humanities in 2010, and has been running for 10 plus years with the active involvement of Rice students. And there have been over 300 participants archived with both their digital oral history and physical materials. So what we do here is to preserve historical content and spoken materials for academic purpose and scholarships. It is an archive that speaks about and studies the experience of Asian and Asian American diaspora to connect this community to a broader national, regional, and global narrative. So without further ado, I want to welcome the two amazing artists on the panel today, Shari Zhang Hill and Anthony Pablano. Shari is a Rice alumni and has 2 bachelor degrees from Rice, a Rice University, at a bachelor degree in art history and architecture, and the bachelor degree of architecture. She was born in Taiwan and moved to the US in her early teenage years. She is a practicing architect as well as an artist, lives and works in Houston. Anthony moved to the US also in his early teenage years from the Philippines and first settled in Corpus Christi, Texas before moving to Houston. He studied art in high school, but later pursued accounting in Texas A&M for undergrad and UT Austin for master's. Anthony is a practicing accountant, but this doesn't stop him from being actively involved in the arts, including volunteering for a number of nonprofits in arts, such as the Visual Arts Alliance. Both of the artists today are part of the Co-op Art Gallery, Archway Gallery, so a shout out to those of you who zoomed in through the Archway Gallery's group. Thank you. We will start by asking each artist to introduce themselves and their artistic journeys. And the audiences are encouraged to ask questions throughout the talk, which are collected by Ashley and answered at the end of the talk. Shari, would you like to go first? I can share your PPT, and you can let me know when you would like to go ahead and scroll to the next slides.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne.
Sure.
I've been doing art for as long as I remember. I remember my first work of art in kindergarten that was selected to be displayed or something in school, and my parents were really proud and they made a big deal. So I thought that that was probably something that I could get a lot of notice with. And I've been doing art ever since. Just started with watercolor as a kid, and since then I've experimented with multiple media, from acrylics to from watercolors to acrylics, experimented with oils, did a lot of drawing, and so throughout my junior high and high school education, and really just all my life. In college, I actually wanted to major in art, studio art, and become a full-time artist. But since I had a Taiwanese mother, she said no to something that was more practical. So I ended up choosing architecture because that was very close to art. And I happened to have been very good with math and love geometry, so that made sense. I've never given up art. I practiced architecture and raised a family for many years. And when my kids were left for college, I went back to doing more art more seriously. And I've been going that way ever since. So you can keep scrolling and yeah. So the art that I'm showing today are mostly recent. I actually have never left using watercolor, but picked up a medium called casein, and that is a milk-based aqua media that they were using back in the 15th century. I really like it because you can achieve both an opaque and a transparency using just that one type of paint. I mix it with watercolor and sometimes acrylic to give it a sharper pop because the casing is a very soft color. So I tend to use the casing on my garden paintings, and recently I've started experimenting with using three-dimensional paperwork like strips, collage, or just making forms, and trying to merge 2D and 3D on the flat canvas. So what you are seeing right now are some of those experiments. And this is one of the most recent work I did, also just to kind of play with the shapes and forms. And this is the most recent one it's still not named because I don't really know yet. It's going to be a body of work. So this has to do with my love of science and space exploration and the cosmics, and I also read a lot. So a lot of my paintings are stories, really. And the way I express that is through layering. And as you can see, a lot of this is layering of, and I didn't show some of the layering that I do with drawings and paintings, but these are layerings of paints and two-dimensional strips of paper and three-dimensional folded pages from a book. Forgive but not forget is my work that is currently at Fondren for the Faces in Pandemic um, exhibit. I have recently taken the back seat to my architectural practice. I practice architecture with my husband, and so he stepped up to take on most of the architectural practice so I can concentrate more on art. So right now, currently, I would say that I am doing art 100% of the time.
Thank you, Shari. Anthony, would you like to go ahead and share your screen?
Hello, everyone. Good evening, friends, families, relatives. Thank you for taking the time to tune in and spending your evening with us. Well, my name is Anthony Pabillano. Like what Anne said, I was born in the Philippines and I immigrated to America when I was about 10 during childhood. Um, in terms of art, in terms of when I started pursuing art, uh, I've really drawn, occasionally as a young kid, but only during the summer before high school um, did I feel the passion to pursue art. So I pursued art in high school. I took art classes for 4 years, and it eventually culminated in an AP studio art portfolio back then, with a concentration on realistic figurative work. Um, True to my Pisces nature, my sun and moon is for anyone who's into astrology. Uh, there wasn't nothing. There was. Uh, I didn't feel tied. It's hard for me to get tied down, especially back then. I could never decide what I wanted to become. But eventually, I focused my education on accounting, and to this day, I apply that education as a forensic accountant um, during the day. Um, but so I didn't pursue art for many years after high school. But 4 years ago, after living in Houston for about 2 years, the creative side of me kind of just woke up. Uh, so I started meeting artists, other people in the community in Houston, people who are not necessarily in the art community. Uh, and the more people that I met, the more intense the feeling became for me to contribute in celebrating the colorful, diverse, and inspirational stories that I just heard throughout the years that I've lived in Houston. Um, in a way, um, these stories, rooted from my immigrant perspective, enabled me to not only recognize, sympathize, empathize with others, but it also sparked in me a willingness to look inwardly and brave opening up wounds from experiences that I've also lived, emotions that I have felt, and moments that I have confronted in my life. Um, and the more I interacted with others, listened to their stories, um, and vicariously, in a way, sort of lived the real, present, and personal um, stories that they had, oh, and see what their eyes have seen, the more my desire to memorialize their stories and their personalities uh, through my portraiture work increased. Um, so it propelled me further into exploring various aspects of the human condition and experience, from ideas related to self and identity in my work, um, and just being in Houston, living here, the most diversity in the country. Um, I'm just constantly inspired by everyone that I meet here, and that's pretty much how my artistic journey has been. um, so some of my work from earlier on, Um, I focus on uplifting stories of people that I share commonalities with, or in general, just um, experiences that they have experienced that I can relate to or understand, and just trying to celebrate the voices that have not necessarily been uh, vocal in terms of the visual art world. Um, so this is a collaboration work with a friend of mine, Rachel Gonzalez. I created a portrait of her, and then she created portraits of me. Um, this is a collaborative work where I take a friend's painting. They were Ellingtons. I cut them up and weave them into a variety of things like baskets and clutches. Um, so, and I delve into ideas related to identity a lot in my work. And that's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And we really appreciate the donation of the portrait of Dr. Yan Chao, and I'm sure like many of us will enjoy it at the Rice campus, and we'll take good care of it. To follow up with that particular work, would you like to share how the process of that particular work and how many, say, layers on each of these like composition and construction, and what are, say, the thickest area that you layer the how many, like, is the thickest point in the painting?
Oh, okay. So my process is starting out with sketches on paper, newsprint paper, just and then from that, I like to utilize extreme contrast between light and dark, basically playing with shadow. In art, they call it chiaroscuro. Uh, basically, so with that in mind, I start out with the silhouette of the particular people that I'm creating portraits of. And then, like in other dry media, um, the technique is in order to create the effect of three-dimensionality, um, you apply a lot of pressure on areas that are further away from you, and then you lighten up your pressure as you get closer to points in the body and in the subject that are closer to the viewer. So I utilize that concept of starting from black, the silhouette, and then using a super dark brown for areas that are furthest away from the viewer, and then gradually using less and um, you know the tones of the different browns in the mid range, and then more of the highlight browns later on for the areas that are closer. Um, and then typically the thickest layer would be the area that also include the the clothing. So in this case, because to get to this point, I needed to render the skin below it, and then the clothing will also have its own set of layers. Yeah.
Wow, that's wonderful to hear the intricate process and the delicate care you take into like observing your subject matter.
Hey,
And
quick question:
yeah,
Am I speaking loudly enough? Or should I?
yeah, I think
Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay.
I'm sure the rest of the audience can.
Okay.
Um, thank you. And if I could turn to Shari to speak more about the work, forgive but not forget. I know we spoke about your inspiration for the title came from Dalai Lama, and who spoke at the Rice campus in one of the years when you were studying. Can you share your experience coming together with that title?
Okay, sorry. Um, I was saying that the Dalai Lama actually came to Rice, um, I believe sometimes in the 90s, so after I had already left school. And of course, since it was the Dalai Lama at Rice, I made sure I went to listen to him because he's all about peace, right? And I remember many things he said, but one phrase that stuck in my head forever, and it had a huge impact on me, was his phrase. What he said was that we should try to forgive, but we should never forget. And forgive people who have, or wrongs that have been done, but we should not forget those wrongs so that we don't repeat them. I mean, that is not to say that we nurture these events or resentments or anything like that, but just, I mean, that's why we study history, right? So we don't repeat the bad things that have happened. The title for this piece came way after I had finished with it, and I was just searching for an appropriate title that was, I guess, not too direct and has more meaning than just the painting itself. I wanted to have the title. I wanted the title to be something that might inspire people to think about things when they see the painting. So that's how this title came about. It's one of my, I know it's being used a lot, and I was afraid that it was a little kind of a cliche, but it seemed to have worked with this painting and this show. Thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. And I know this work is a first for you in many ways, and you usually don't work on commissions, and you don't usually work in the realms of figuration and portraits and not history, as you prefer more abstract and space and science focused. And the approach is very different from any other body of your work, as you called it an outlier. But as you said, you love rice and you do anything for rice, and we really tremendously are grateful for that. And this research and history based on emotionally intense and content rich piece of work, I trust is a great starter for our talk series, as it really helps us to build some background and history timeline that we all need to for understanding the context of the exhibition. And I believe some of the Rice students that they never heard these stories in their works, in their curriculum. And you also mentioned the amount of research and the emotional toll that you have experienced through the research and involving you have to take breaks from time to time. Can you speak about the process of making this work?
Sure. So when you had asked if I was interested in doing a piece of work for this show, I of course said yes before I actually thought about it too much. But I'm glad I did say yes. So then it was time to think about what I want to do, how I want to, which message I wanted to have the work, and which message the work should embody, because it happened in when Black Lives Matter was protests and was going on. So there was a lot of racial strife that was in the news, on the news already every night. So I guess I wanted to, I felt like maybe this is a opportunity to speak to racial injustice and racism in general, and not just focus on our weird time, the pandemic times. But so I wanted to, I decided to kind of pull back and look at the issue in the broad spectrum, in both in terms of not just my Asianness, but also Black Lives Matters. And then when I looked into the racial injustices of that have been looked against Asians in this country, I realized that they have been a lot of it, and also against any person of color throughout the US history. And I, I wasn't naive, but I was just flabbergasted at how deep it was, how prevalent it was, and how much of it was fanned by our political leaders that were supposed to be helping unite us all. And that played into what's happening right now. So for what I wanted to say, I thought to do basically a historical illustration. It was very hard diving into each individual incident and read about the victims and their personal history and how it affected their families. I know well, he just passed away, knew a person who was in the Japanese internment camp when he was younger, and his experiences. So that was pretty personal to me too. Yes, stop, area limits, sentry on duty. So all the internment camps had barbed wires all around, and had soldiers with guns on duty at all times. And it just horrified me how this racism keeps happening over and over and over again. And like we sometimes it's depressing, right? That you think that we don't change, and therefore it ties back to the title, Forgive But Not Forget.
It's really powerful. And I believe you also spoke about the timeline in terms of how it is read from left to right as Asians grow. Although this incident is for an American audience that we're reading from left to right, and I just want to say at the ends of the scroll there are unopened canvas that are wrote, which is not illustrated in this screen capture. So there is definitely a lot of intent in that. Shari, I guess, do you want to speak about that the time aspect of this piece?
Sure. This was done to mimic a traditional horizontal Chinese scroll, Asian scroll, because many countries in Asia had that kind of style in telling a story. And since I was telling a story, basically a history, which is a story, I chose to do this kind of like an Asian scroll, where the viewer is meant to be looking at the work only maybe 10 to 12 inches at a time. As you roll one end and unroll the other, you put yourself actively in the timeline of the storytelling. And of course, in a traditional Chinese scrolls, one reads from right to left. So you start on the very left, and then you start unrolling. To the right. You read from right to left. So you start looking at the work from the right-hand side, and as you move along the storyline, you slowly unroll the left-hand side to reveal more of the story. But since this was going to be displayed at Fondren for mostly students and visitors that are not accustomed to reading from right to left, I compromised and decided that it was probably better and not as confusing if I just do the left to right direction. And so this piece that I did, the left-hand side has a kind of folded, a rolled piece that's not so thick, but on the very right, where the COVID time, our time, the leftover canvas is much more, because we, and this is a question that I wanted to throw into the painting, like, does it stop here now, or as we keep unrolling the scroll, does the racism continue on forward? And how far forward in time are we going to still have this racism? Okay.
Well, thank you. And I guess next, if I can ask how you experience art as someone who has two jobs. I guess full-time job for Anthony is an accountant, and a full-time job for Shari is an architect. So how has these like different worlds of your different parts of your life inspired or challenged your artistic creativity? Anthony, would you like to take that?
Okay, sure. Accounting and artists are kind of really completely different, but I take I put a lot of value in that in terms of one enables me to escape from the other. Art is definitely something that I look forward to after work and during the weekends, and um, there's not a lot of overlap between the two. I do apply as a forensic accountant. I try to put my shoes, myself in people's minds in terms of trying to determine ways upon which they could have cheated the system, perpetrated some sort of scheme or fraud. So in one regard, uh, I'm able to use a little bit of creativity in the work that I do. Uh, so in accounting. So outside of accounting, my work, I also volunteer um, for two nonprofits, and one of them is arts related, like what you mentioned earlier, Visual Arts Alliance. Um, so that's directly something that has an impact to our local art community. Um, as an accountant, naturally, I'm a board member who's doing uh, the treasury work for them. The other nonprofit that I'm in is Filipino American National Historical Society, the Houston chapter, and it's been around for 5 years, but only recently have we started to um, get that nonprofit really off the ground. So I'm kind of involved at the beginning uh, in terms of the administrative work that is involved. Uh, but my role there is also in the treasury, given that I'm an accountant.
Yeah, I'm sure they're grateful that you are able to help with both the skills of an artist and accountants. How about for you, Shari, as both architect and artist?
Well, I'm very glad I'm not an accountant, because I cannot. I mean, when I said I was good at math, it wasn't adding and subtracting and all that stuff. So architecture and art, opposite of what accounting and art is to Anthony. Architecture and art are pretty similar, and they both are creative fields. And architecture can be an art. And since I am an architect, I can't help but bring that aspect of myself to my art making. So in my art, I actually use a lot of perspectives, and the layering is one aspect of the architectural practice or designing building. It's, you know, you start with a program, which in art you don't, but and maybe that's why I don't take commissions, because in architecture, you're basically given a, you know, this is, I want a house and I want 3 bedrooms, or, you know, or I want a school and this is all the things that I want, and you just have to put them all together and design them. So in art, I feel a little freer in that I start with nothing. It's all from myself. I do art for myself. And in architecture, when you design, you start with this big idea, and then you go from the big idea to you know, refining it and refining it and refining. So there is that layering of process, and I think that I just naturally bring that kind of process into my art making. So recently I was told that by my art teacher, critic art teacher, saying that my art is a lot of layering of information, and that all the layers and all the information in the end are storytelling. They're telling stories, and that is also true. I'm becoming more self-aware as an artist because I love to read, and I love science fiction, and I end up creating worlds through my art. And I think in architecture, I also do kind of that. You know, I create spaces that not to tell stories, but to provide a kind of, I guess, kind of a place for people to live or to experience. So in the way, I'm creating a stage for a story to happen. So those two are pretty similar. Like I said earlier, I'm trying to get out of architecture by hoisting that on my partner, but and focusing more on art. I actually try to get away from being so precise um, and doing perspectives and shapes and forms. But I just recently realized that that's just me, and I can't get away from that. So might as well just do the best I can with all that tool.
Wonderful. It's definitely so many layers of like time, space. And in this piece, you have like demonstrated and orchestrated so many different, like from 200 years till now, which is amazing. And in Anthony's case, is the layering of paper and chiaroscuro and contrast of light and shadows through like this play with the three-dimensional medium, and which is, yeah, definitely both of the dimensionalities of in your works are amazing. And next, I want to ask about this layering of your Asian American identity into your works, and how have the identity and the kind of ancestry from your home countries and cultural heritage have inspired in your works?
Do you want me to go first, or do you want Anthony to go first?
Sure. Sure, would you like to go first?
Okay, so that is a question that I hadn't thought about before you asked, and I know you've asked me this before, and I have been kind of chewing over this question, and I think that I can't help but being somebody who grew up on an island, basically, with all the sounds and all the colors and the lushness of the environment. So even though I always stress in kind of somber colors, my paintings are like, they explode with colors and a lot going on. And I probably brought that with me because that's part of me. That's the influence of where I was born and grew up. And, you know, they say that how you are raised and where you're raised until you're 12 is what determines what you're going to be like in adulthood. So I was in Taiwan until I was 13 years old. 13 years old. So that my time there is definitely a basis for who I am. My experience here, and of course, when I first came here in the early 70s, there were very few Asians in Houston, and of course now that's changed a whole lot. But I was one of one of three people in my high school that was an Asian. So I always felt like kind of an outsider and trying to fit in. I personally have not experienced a lot of racism directed at me. There have been some, but I was able to kind of just, you know, not let it fester in my head, I guess, and turn my focus to something else. But I'm very glad to see, like what Anthony said earlier, that Houston is one of the most diverse places in America, and I'm just really glad that that's happened, and it's changing for the better.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely remember of your oral history when you were discussing that when you were a kid, you climbing onto the roof of your neighbor to paint, and that was just such a adorable and beautiful picture itself. And I guess for you, Anthony, what is your cultural heritage and its representation or metaphor in your work?
So I left when I was about 10, so I was pretty young back then. Uh, so I wasn't able to, in the life that I lived then, I wasn't able to fully experience my culture in terms of being a Filipino. And actually, I had a somewhat had a traumatic childhood back then, to the point that for many years after I left, after I was able to, in my mind, escape, I pushed those memories in the back of my mind. Only really in the past few years did I really start, um, in a way, rediscovering myself as a Filipino, who immigrated into America. So, in terms of heritage and, palpable, cultural and heritage rich ideas and traditions that I carried over to America, I don't have much, but what I do have is based on my experiences back then. Um, you know, uh, Tough period in my life, I was able to carry with me from over there um, ideas related to, or just the ability to really recognize, sympathize, and empathize with others, because I have experienced a lot of things then that I'm able to see in others pretty quickly, because I have lived and I have experienced some of the things that I see others are experiences. So in a way, I don't necessarily have any Filipino cultures or traditions um, um, that I have brought over and applied to my work, but rather just a generic sense of humanity, being able to empathize and connect with others.
Wow, that's beautifully said. Thank you. And I just wondering, as I guess this term Asian American artist, what does it mean to you? Because I understand from my own experience that some of the artists reject this kind of categorization or labeling. They call it as Asian American, and an artist. What is your I guess this might be a little bit difficult, but what is your personal view? Would you reject or embrace this categorization? Or
For
what
me,
you should call it, categorization, I guess.
oh, personally, I wouldn't mind having being called that. In my mind, it's just a label, you know, and we all of us are, covered with all sorts of labels based on where we live, who we interact with, what we decide to associate ourselves with, what we like, etc. So I can be called a Houston artist, because that's true. I lived in Houston. I practice art here. I don't mind being called an Asian artist because I'm from the Philippines. I don't mind being called Filipino artist. So personally, I wouldn't have any sort of apprehension towards that term. Being Asian American artist or just Asian artist, I wouldn't mind.
Thank you. And Shari, do you have any thoughts?
Well, actually, I don't like labels, like, because I feel that when I am giving a label, I tend to get slotted into a prescribed way of expression. When I think of if somebody says Asian artist, I think of somebody whose art has more than mine, more of an Asian background that they carry with them. Whereas I don't think mine has that. It's just, I feel like that's just me. Um, so that's my only thought.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. We definitely understand and notice, and like artists have their own individual manifestos and missions. And I also just want to ask about your mask series that you mentioned this identity that we all kind of put on every day before we go to work, and that's like the motivation behind that work. Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Sure. There were actually two motivations behind the mask works, and one was to reuse and reuse things that we throw away on a regular basis, like shipping boxes. That's what the masks were made mostly. And I also just so we have a lot of chopsticks at home, so I also use chopsticks as part of my materials to make the masks. But I was experimenting with just building things because, being an architect, I'm used to building, and I'm old enough that before computers and before SketchUp and stuff like that, we build models to show clients. So I'm pretty good with an X-Acto knife and rulers and all that stuff. So I just had a bunch of shipping boxes, and I looked at them one day and said, well, I don't want to throw them away. So they'll just, just, I thought I could make something out of them. And that was during George Bush's term when we invaded Iraq, and the country was very divided back then. I mean, less so than it is now, but it was divided. And so I started making the mask, and some of my masks unconsciously became kind of, some people call it like diversity, because there were massive that seemed like they were of different background. Like there was a mask that reminded myself of Greek, somebody Greek, and there was one that was sort of Japanese, and I started naming them after that, and I also made this mask that was called the wall, with one person looking profile looking one way and the other one looking the other way, with a physical wall in between with barbed wires on top. That was my political response to what was happening then. So that morphed into the idea of why I was using modern materials readily throwaway and and temporary materials to make something that has existed in history for hundreds, if not thousands of years, you know, totems and masks of all kinds. And these masks come from every culture, like every time period. So it's a very universal thing that humans do. And so I started thinking of that, why was I making these masks that are timeless out of very throwaway and modern materials? And so I started playing off that contrast. And you know, the mass idea, masks are used for ritual purposes, for health purposes nowadays, you know, all kinds of purposes. Um, and um, and I read a quote by Oscar Wilde, and I can't really remember the exact verbiage, but it said, man is true to himself when he has a mask on. And I started thinking about how, you know, like I brush my hair and put on a nice shirt for the Zoom meeting. So I'm putting a mask on for our participants, and that's what we all do all the time. And so I was just trying to bring that into our consciousness.
Oh, that's really interesting that you're yeah, incorporating that into this the theme of the faces of the pandemic, as well as we are all like wearing masks, and masks is a, yeah, an act of activism as well. It can be political and it can be charged with messages. And I just want to point out that I do I wanted to ask because I saw that in your submitted photo for the mural project, and do you want to share with us, and if you would like to do that, Anthony, to as well, the how the process of and probably some of the messages that you had in submitting the photos for the Faces in the Pandemic community project?
So the photos. Um, so basically, so what was the question?
Oh, I was just wondering if you have any stories or any messages
Oh,
behind.
yeah, that's true. So, but my basic message about that, I created a set of a dozen masks in different shades of brown. Basically, that was my just personal reaction uh, at the beginning of the pandemic, and also my way of creating something that I can later on donate. Um, and so I created those in different shades of brown with the intent of kind of conveying or spreading the message that at the end of the day, it takes effort by all of us to overcome this. We might as well just play along and you know, don the mask, if you will, and help curb the spread of the virus. And so that's pretty much it.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess next is our artist on artist session. If you both of you would like to ask questions for each other or comment. Anthony, do you have any questions for Shari?
Sorry, I just muted myself. My question for Shari is that I guess she answered my question. She kind of answered earlier in terms of how architecture informs her art. But another question that I have is going forward. You showed a little preview of what you'll be pursuing in terms of a future body of work. Like, what do you foresee in terms of subject matter and etc. that you'll be pursuing in your next series of works?
Okay. I am all over the place. I felt about my art, and but I guess to answer your question, what I would create next, I don't know. I know that right now I am focused on this journey, and that journey is to become more aware of myself as an artist. And by looking at other people's work and by looking at my own work and trying to figure out where I am in not just my own journey, but compare to other people's journeys. So that's my short-term goal. And then maybe once that's answered or that has become more clear to me, then I can start longer term plannings. I'm not very good at that. Planning, long-term planning or short-term planning. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So my question for Anthony is, are there a few, but the big one is, why did you start working with papers? What drew you to that medium?
Oh, okay. So back in high school, I've always focused on portraiture work. That was eventually the what I based or centered my portfolio on. Um, so in terms of the material itself, paper, it started with a Matisse project that my art teacher assigned to us, and basically, given that I was, you know, obsessed with rendering the human form, I started cutting the paper in human shapes, and then later on, my art teacher brought out a box of scrap wallpaper, and there's just a variety of different designs, patterns, colors, and that just in my mind back then was completely captured. I was completely enamored by the variety in terms of this simple material paper. It was wallpaper back then. Um, and so I just continued doing that. Eventually, I started cutting into, after just cutting into paper to convey the different, the outlines uh, of the forms. Um, I started to uh, develop the ideas of, layering the different papers in a way that uh, they're gradating in value from dark to light. It started out with geometric shapes, and then I was able to, apply my love of the human form into that method. And well, I've been obsessed ever since. It's tedious, but the tediousness of it is somewhat appealing to me in terms of enabling me to kind of escape, forget about life for hours on end at night, and just pass the time away.
Totally get that. And the other questions, do you, the portraits that you do, are they people you know? And if they are, do you work off photographs?
Oh yes, people that I meet and people whose stories that kind of resonate with me in a way. Um, so there's the the first major large paper portrait I created 3 years ago was that of the lady on a golden chair. Basically, her stories, she's a single mom, etc. And I saw in her stories that um, I saw parallels with my experience, my mom's story. And so basically, I create portraits of people whose stories I connect with in different ways. Typically, it's just personal, their personalities, their life experiences, where they've been, where they're going, and
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you both. I wonder if we have any questions from the audiences.
One of the questions was from Alina. What is your advice to new artists or people interested in pursuing art?
you want to take that down?
Oh, so my advice would be, if I could go back in time, I would definitely have pursued art in college, um, because given that I pursued a different route, and then I eventually um, made my way back, made my way back to art. I could have been more efficient with my life in a way and just pursued it initially, because at the end of the day, I see myself more as an artist instead of an accountant. And I think having, starting it earlier on, prevent you catapults your career further than people like me who started later on.
My advice would be to just do art for yourself first, and keep doing it no matter what, and do as much as you can. But more importantly, to look at art. And if you have a chance, take art history. Definitely you need to know art history.
Yeah, I want to mention that Shari Zhang's work actually have, a lot of references, and I, I think we discussed, you looked at Picasso, and you look at Diego Rivera, in those coming together with the forgive but not forget work. Do we have anything else from the audience?
One of my questions, a personal question from me, is how do you think art as a medium can best tell these stories of like racism, the pandemic, etc.?
I think artists, but I think we all individually have a responsibility to engage ourselves in politics and social issues. It doesn't matter if it's through art. If you're an accountant that volunteers your time, if you're an architect who do pro bono work, I think art is just another way to engage yourself with the greater humanity, and you need to make your voice heard. So, any venue, right? Any venue where you can speak up is a good thing.
Thank you so much for that answer.
Sure.
From Adrian, was there any artist in particular that inspired you for both Anthony and Shari Tseng?
For me, oh, sorry. Well, a lot of artists in the Renaissance time period are inspirational to me, that I look up to, because of the fact that I love realism, and I love dramatic plays with light, and so any and all work that were created during that time are just beautiful in my eyes. But of course, also Matisse in more recent times was an inspiration in terms of him being, you know, uh, the, the artist who kind of made it mainstream, creating artwork with paper.
For me, there isn't any artist in particular, although I really do like German expressionism a lot. The artists that so my own history, I actually started with realistic paintings, and then when I did watercolors, super realism. But now I do abstract, and I can't imagine myself going back to doing realistic work. And so I think throughout history, all the artists have something to tell, something to inspire, and so it's hard for me to say. So I'm taking a class right now, and the teacher it's an art critique class and how to write art critiques and reviews. And the one thing that the teacher said that actually made me think very hard about is like she used food as example. You may like sushi a lot and you may hate Mexican food. And I thought, oh, she's speaking about me. But but as an artist, you need to really learn how to appreciate art. Just like you even though Mexican food is not your thing, you know, when you see and taste a Mexican food that's really well done, and that's where how you can learn to appreciate it. And similar to art, because there are many different styles, or music. Like a lot of people my age really don't like rap. And I've had this conversation with a lot of people, and I've come to realize that rap as a style on its own has merit. And even though it's not my thing, I should learn to appreciate it in its artistic way. So that's what art is too.
Another question from the dial-in is, how do you meet your next subject for portraiture for Mr. Pabillano?
Oh, so about, well, the pandemic really put a dent on that because even though I'm a true introvert, I do find energy to, and I love meeting people through friends of friends, etc., through activities I engage myself in. So naturally, I find my subjects uh, by meeting them. But recently, like the commission that I'm doing right now at the back, someone reached out to me and asked me to create a portrait of their significant other. So so I wish I wish this whole pandemic is over so we can go back into the world and start meeting others again, meeting people, interacting with others.
I guess there's another question for Anthony is what experience do you share with your last portrait is? I guess it's the person that is commissioning you for that portrait, right?
Sorry, what was that?
The experience you shared with your last portrait is the commission.
Oh, okay. Also, this particular portrait, I'm in a way, it's kind of I'm very driven by it because of the fact that even though I met the person briefly 2 years ago, and they reached out to me 2 years later. But the portrait that he asked me to create is a portrait of his significant other and their dad, their father, who they happen to be from the Philippines, and so there's a lot of connections that are that are tugging at my heartstrings with this particular portrait work. So
I guess I also have a question. Like, what is the like among people's face? What is the part that you pay attention most in terms of observation to kind of portray?
oh yeah, so even though I don't render it as much with paper, but in other media, I pay attention to it further. It's the eyes. With paper, it's hard to go into details in terms of rendering the different parts of the eye. But just getting the right shape is what I focus on initially, near the beginning, because capturing the eyes enables you to get a better starting point in terms of really capturing the person's image in my mind. Other artists agree. They say that the eyes are the windows to people's souls.
Yeah, for sure. I guess we're running out of time. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Anthony and Shari and Ashley for the help in Yeah, I just want to share that everyone are welcome to join us for the next week, same time, Wednesday, 6 p.m. And the registration link is in ha.rice.edu/events. And the Faces in the Pandemic exhibition is also on view through to November 15th. So please come visit while it's still going on. And I'll post a link to reservation for reservation shortly. And we look forward to seeing you in the next talk and in the exhibition. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.